Most people believe food only lasts because of electricity. Turn the power off for 1 week, and panic begins. Now, imagine living your entire life without refrigerators, without freezers, without plastic, without constant supply. Imagine winter coming, fields empty, and nothing new growing for months. This was normal life for medieval people, and yet, they did not starve. They stored food in ways that worked with air, time, earth, and patience. They understood things we no longer notice, not because they were smarter, but because their lives depended on it. In this video, you are about to see how ordinary people, hundreds of years ago, kept food safe for months without a single modern machine. Once you understand how they did it, you may never look at modern convenience the same way again. Food was stored the moment it was harvested. Medieval people did not collect food just to eat it. They collected food to stay alive later. When crops were cut from the field, no one waited. Grain was not piled up and forgotten. It was spread out right away so air and sunlight could slowly dry it. Everyone knew that damp grain would spoil, and spoiled grain meant hunger in winter. When an animal was slaughtered, the work began the same day. Meat was never left sitting around. It was cleaned, cut, and prepared immediately. Some of it was salted, some smoked, some dried. Waiting even 1 day could ruin everything. Vegetables were never treated the same way. As soon as they came from the soil, they were separated. Soft vegetables were eaten quickly. Hard roots were kept for long storage. Nothing was mixed. Nothing was guessed. There was no idea of later. Later did not exist, because later meant mold. Later meant insects. Later meant loss. Before food ever entered the house, its future was already decided. Some food was meant for today, some for next week, some for deep winter. That decision was made before hunger arrived, not after. This is why medieval food lasted. They didn't wait for problems to appear. They acted before problems had time to grow. Salt was used to slow time. Salt was not used the way we use it today. For medieval people, salt was not about taste. It was about buying time. They understood something very simple. Food goes bad because moisture stays inside it. When moisture stays, tiny living things grow. Those tiny living things turn food into rot. Salt's job was to pull that moisture out slowly and completely. When meat was covered in salt, water began to leave the flesh. As the moisture disappeared, the food became a place where rot could not survive. Time itself slowed down. What would spoil in days could now last for months. But salt was never used carelessly. Too little salt meant the food would still rot. Too much salt meant the food became impossible to eat. So people learned balance, not from books, but from experience. Families remembered how much salt worked in winter, how much worked in summer, and how much worked for different kinds of meat and fish. These details were passed down, not written down. Salt was layered carefully. Meat was pressed, turned, and watched. If liquid appeared, it was drained. If the surface felt wrong, more salt was added. Food was never left unattended. Preservation was active, not passive. Salt also protected food during travel. Fish packed in salt could move from the coast to inland villages without spoiling. Meat could survive long journeys without ice or cold storage. In many places, salt was more valuable than money. People traded for it, protected it, and stored it carefully because they knew without salt, winter became dangerous. Salt did not make food last forever, but it gave people something far more important. It gave them control over time. Smoke turned food into a hostile environment. Smoke was not used to make food taste better. That was only a side effect. For medieval people, smoke was a form of protection. They discovered that when food stayed in smoke for long periods, it changed in a way that stopped decay. The air around the food became dry. Insects avoided it. Tiny living things that caused rot could not survive there. Meat and fish were hung high above slow fires, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks. The fire was never strong. Strong fire cooked food and ruined it. What they wanted was gentle smoke, moving slowly around the surface. Different woods were chosen with care. Some woods produced soft smoke that worked well for meat. Others were better for fish. People learned this by watching what spoiled and what survived. Over time, they remembered which smoke protected food the longest. The smoke did more than dry the food. It left a thin, invisible layer on the surface. That layer made the food difficult for insects to touch and harder for decay to begin. Even the smell warned animals to stay away. Smokehouses were built away from living spaces and designed to hold food safely. Air could move through, but rain and insects could not enter. Food was checked often. If something did not look right, it was moved or smoked longer. This method allowed meat to survive long winters without cold. It allowed food to stay safe in places where cellars were not enough. Smoke did not stop time completely, but it made the world around the food uncomfortable for anything that wanted to destroy it. And that discomfort kept people alive. Fermentation was guided, not random. When medieval people saw food begin to change, they did not panic. They knew that change was not always the enemy. The real danger was uncontrolled change. Instead of trying to stop food from changing, they learned how to guide it. They watched how food behaved in warmth, in cold, in dry air, and in damp places. Over time, they understood that certain changes made food safer, not worse. Vegetables placed in salty water would slowly turn sour instead of rotten. Milk left in the right conditions became thicker and stronger instead of dangerous. Dough that rested long enough became easier to digest and lasted longer. None of this was left to chance. Containers were chosen carefully. Some were sealed tightly. Others were left slightly open. Food was kept away from direct heat and strong cold. If the smell changed in the wrong way, it was corrected or discarded early before it became unsafe. People tasted and observed their food daily. They learned what a healthy change smelled like and what a bad change looked like. This knowledge lived in memory, not in written rules. Fermented food became more stable over time. It could survive travel, it could survive storage. In many cases, it became safer than fresh food, which could spoil quickly without warning. This was not magic. It was attention. By guiding the change instead of ignoring it, medieval people turned fragile food into something stronger, more reliable, and long-lasting. They did not fight nature. They listened to it and worked with it. Underground storage was natural climate control. Medieval people quickly learned that food lasted longer when it was kept below the ground. They noticed that the earth stayed cool even when the air above was hot. In summer, underground spaces felt cold. In winter, they felt protected and steady. This natural balance made a huge difference. So they built storage spaces into the ground, not randomly, but with care. Thick stone walls helped control moisture. Depth kept the temperature steady. Darkness stopped vegetables from growing or spoiling too fast. These places were not wet holes. They were dry, clean, and carefully watched. If water appeared, it was drained. If air felt heavy, openings were adjusted. Everything was done to keep the space calm and stable. Root vegetables stayed firm instead of soft. Apples stayed fresh instead of shriveling. Grains stayed safe from insects and mold. Food rested quietly instead of fighting heat and cold. Some underground rooms stayed nearly the same temperature all year long. Without ice, without machines, without power. Medieval people did not try to control nature. They placed food where nature already worked in their favor. By using the ground itself, they created a simple system that protected food through heat, frost, and long months of waiting. The earth became their refrigerator, and it never failed them. Fat sealed food from oxygen. Medieval people understood something that many people today never think about. Food does not spoil only because it is old. It spoils because air reaches it. When air touches food for too long, decay begins. So medieval people looked for ways to block air completely, and they found the answer in fat. After meat was cooked, it was placed into containers and covered fully with melted animal fat. As the fat cooled, it hardened and formed a tight seal. No air could pass through. Nothing from the outside could reach the food. Inside that sealed space, decay slowed almost to a stop. The meat stayed protected for long periods, even without cold storage. When people needed food, they simply broke the fat layer, took what they needed, and sealed the rest again. Fat did more than block air. It also kept moisture stable and stopped insects from reaching the food. The fat itself acted like a wall between the food and the outside world. This method required patience and care. If the meat was not cooked properly, it would spoil inside the seal. If the fat did not cover everything, air would enter. People learned to do it correctly through experience, not guesswork. To medieval people, fat was not something to fear or avoid. It was valuable, useful, and trusted. It kept food safe when nothing else could. By sealing food away from oxygen, they turned something fragile into something reliable, strong, and ready for the long months ahead. Drying was done in controlled stages. Medieval people knew that removing water from food was one of the safest ways to make it last. But they also knew that drying food too fast or too slowly could ruin it. So drying was never rushed. Food was first placed where fresh air could move around it. Sunlight helped, but strong heat was avoided. Too much heat would cook the food on the outside while trapping moisture inside, and that hidden moisture would cause spoilage later. After the first drying, food was moved to shade or indoors. This slower stage allowed moisture to leave evenly. Meat, fruits, and herbs were watched carefully during this time. If the surface felt wrong or smelled strange, the food was adjusted or dried longer. Drying often took many days, sometimes weeks. People turned the food, checked it by touch, and learned to feel when it was ready. This was knowledge learned by hands, not by rules. Rain, humidity, and insects were always considered. Food was protected with cloth, hung high, or moved when weather changed. Nothing was left to chance. Because drying was done slowly and in stages, the food became stable all the way through, not just on the surface. This is why dried foods could be stored for months or even years without becoming dangerous. Patience was the most important part. By taking time, medieval people made food strong enough to survive long seasons of waiting. Each food required its own environment. Medieval people did not store all food in one place. They understood that different foods needed different conditions to stay safe. What protected one kind of food could quickly ruin another. Grain needed dry air and space. If it touched moisture, it would mold and attract insects. So it was kept off the ground, often in raised containers, away from damp walls. Vegetables needed cool darkness. Light caused them to grow or soften. Warm air made them rot. So they were placed deep underground where the temperature stayed calm and steady. Cheese needed air, but not too much. It needed moisture, but not wetness. That is why cheese was kept in stone rooms or caves, where the air felt alive, but controlled. Meat needed movement of air and protection from insects. It was hung high, sometimes near smoke, sometimes in open places where air could pass freely. Nothing was stored randomly. Each type of food had a place chosen for its nature. Modern homes mix all food together in one warm space and depend on machines to fix the problem. Medieval homes avoided the problem by understanding food itself. By giving each food what it needed, they prevented spoilage before it had a chance to begin. Spoilage was managed, not panicked. Medieval people did not expect food to stay perfect. They knew that over time, food would change. The important thing was not stopping every change, but noticing the change early and responding calmly. When food showed the first signs of turning, it was not thrown away in fear. It was examined. The smell was checked. The texture was touched. People knew the difference between dangerous spoilage and simple change. If meat began to soften, it was cooked right away. If moisture appeared, more salt was added, or the food was dried again. If vegetables started to weaken, they were used immediately, or turned into something that could last longer. Food was always watched. It was never forgotten at the back of a room. This attention prevented small problems from becoming disasters. Because nothing was wasted easily, people learned how long food could still be used safely. They understood stages, not sudden endings. Modern life teaches panic and disposal. Medieval life taught observation and adjustment. By managing spoilage instead of fearing it, they stretched their food through long months and survived times when there was no room for mistakes. Knowledge was the true preservative. In the end, the most important thing medieval people preserved was not food. It was knowledge. Methods were not written in books or stored in machines. They lived in memory and daily practice. Children learned by watching. Young people learned by doing. Mistakes were remembered because the cost of forgetting was hunger. People knew when the weather was right for drying. They knew how food should smell at each stage. They knew when salt had done its job and when smoke needed more time. This understanding came from years of experience, not instructions. When something failed, the lesson was passed on. Families and villages carried this knowledge forward together. Each generation started stronger than the last. There was no electricity to depend on, no button to fix mistakes. If food was lost, there was no replacement. That pressure created care, attention, and respect. Today, machines do the thinking for us. When they stop working, we feel helpless. Medieval people were never helpless because the knowledge lived inside them. Food lasted because wisdom lasted. And as long as that wisdom survived, so did they. Medieval life was not easy, but it was aware. People paid attention to the world around them. They watched seasons, air, earth, and time. They did not rush. They did not waste. They did not panic. They survived not because they had more, but because they understood more. Today, we have machines that promise comfort, yet we forget how fragile they are. One failure, one outage, and everything stops. The past reminds us that survival does not come from technology alone. It comes from patience, care, and knowledge passed from hand to hand. These old ways are not meant to replace modern life, but to remind us of something important. When humans remember how to work with nature, not against it, they become stronger. And maybe that is the lesson worth carrying forward. If this story mattered to you, take a moment to reflect on it. Because the past is not gone, it is still speaking.